The winter of 1865 in New Orleans was unseasonably cold. The war had ended, but the city still smelled of gunpowder and decay. And in the Garden District, behind iron gates twisted with dead magnolia vines, stood St. Ursula's Convent, a place known for its charity, its silence, and its devotion. For 40 years, the Sisters of St. Ursula had tended to the sick, buried the poor, and taken vows of perpetual service. The Mother Superior, Sister Magdalene Thibodeau, was respected throughout Louisiana. Wealthy families donated fortunes to keep the convent's hospital wing operating. The nuns were angels, they said, pure, untouchable, until the morning of January 12, 1865, when the city coroner received an anonymous letter. It contained a single line: "They have been dead for 20 years, but they still walk the halls." When federal troops forced open the convent doors 3 days later, they found the refectory table set for morning prayer. 42 chairs, 42 Bibles, 42 cups of cold tea, but no nuns. What they found instead, in the basement morgue beneath the chapel, changed everything they thought they knew about death, devotion, and the price of immortality. The only report that survived the military suppression stated this: they were not alive, but they were not decomposing either. But before we unseal the archives on this case, leave your comment below. What country and city are you listening from? And what exact time of day or night does the darkness feel thickest where you are? Your answer helps us know just how far these stories are reaching. What you are about to hear comes from Dossier 73-U, declassified in 1979 from the Union Army's Department of Unusual Incidents. The file was marked "Theological Threat. Quarantine Protocol Enacted." The case was buried because it exposed something the church, the military, and the wealthiest families of New Orleans all wanted forgotten. A secret that began not with faith, but with science. Not with God, but with ambition. And it started with a man named Dr. Lucien Moreau. Dr. Moreau was a celebrated physician in 1825, trained in Paris, specializing in what was then called preservation medicine, the experimental science of halting decay. He believed the body was a machine, and like any machine, it could be maintained indefinitely if you understood its mechanisms. His theories were dismissed by the medical establishment as heretical, but the aristocratic families of New Orleans, obsessed with legacy and terrified of yellow fever epidemics, listened. They funded him privately, and when he needed a place to work in secret, away from prying eyes, they introduced him to the Sisters of St. Ursula. The convent was perfect. It already had a hospital wing, it had a morgue, and most importantly, it had the one thing Moreau needed more than money: willing participants who believed suffering was holy. The pact was simple. Dr. Moreau would help the nuns live longer, serve longer, transcend the limitations of the flesh. In exchange, they would become his subjects, his proof, his masterpiece. The Mother Superior at the time, Sister Magdalene, was only 29 years old, but she was dying of tuberculosis. She accepted the offer not out of vanity, but out of devotion. She wanted to serve God forever. What she did not know was that Dr. Moreau's preservation method required something more than medicine. It required replacing the blood. The official church records from 1826 claim that Sister Magdalene made a miraculous recovery. Her tuberculosis vanished. Her strength returned. She lived for another 39 years without aging a single day. But the miracle was not divine. It was chemical. In the basement morgue of St. Ursula's, Dr. Moreau had constructed what he called the preservation chamber, a sealed room lined with copper pipes and glass vessels filled with a thick, amber liquid. The liquid was his life's work, a formula derived from formaldehyde, mercury chloride, and something else. Something he never named in his notes, only referred to as the catalyst. The process was simple in theory. Drain the blood. Replace it with the formula. Keep the body cool. The result, Moreau claimed, was biological stasis. The body would not age, it would not decay, it would not die, but it would not truly live either. Sister Magdalene was the first. She entered the chamber in February of 1826, gasping and skeletal from disease. She emerged 3 days later, pale as wax, her heartbeat slow and faint, but her eyes open, clear, aware. She said she felt no pain, no hunger, no fatigue. She said she felt nothing at all. When Bishop Armand Delacroix visited the convent in 1827, he was alarmed. Sister Magdalene looked exactly as she had the year before, not healthier, not older, exactly the same. He questioned her privately. He asked if she had made a pact with the devil. She smiled and said, "I made a pact with God. I asked to serve him forever," and he answered. The bishop did not believe her, but he also did not report her, because the convent was producing miracles. The sick who came to St. Ursula's were being healed at impossible rates. The donations from wealthy families were funding churches across Louisiana. And every year 1 or 2 more nuns entered the preservation chamber. By 1840 there were 12 of them, pale, unaging, silent. By 1850 there were 28. By 1865 there were 42. And on the morning of January 12th, when the anonymous letter arrived at the coroner's office, every single one of them vanished. The federal troops who entered St. Ursula's on January 15, 1865, were led by Captain Isaiah Wardwell, a decorated Union officer who had seen the worst of the war. He had walked through fields of corpses at Shiloh. He had burned plantation houses in Georgia, but nothing prepared him for what he found in that convent. His official report, sealed for over a century, described the scene in clinical detail. No signs of struggle, no blood, no bodies, only the overwhelming smell of chemicals and something else he could not identify. Something sweet, something wrong. The refectory was pristine, the chapel untouched. But when they descended into the basement morgue, they found the preservation chamber. The copper pipes were still warm, the glass vessels were empty, but stained with residue. And on the stone floor, written in what appeared to be ash, was a single phrase in Latin: "Nos numquam moriamur," we will never die. Captain Wardwell ordered his men to search every room, every closet, every crawl space. They found medical journals written in French. They found anatomical drawings that showed the human circulatory system in terrifying detail. They found receipts for chemicals purchased from apothecaries in Paris, Boston, and Charleston. But they did not find the nuns until Private Marcus Holt opened the ice house. The ice house was located behind the convent, partially underground, designed to store food and medicine during the brutal Louisiana summers. It had not been opened in weeks. The lock was rusted, the door swollen. When Private Holt finally forced it open, the cold air that rushed out was so sharp it burned his lungs. And inside, standing in perfect rows, were the nuns. All 42 of them. They were not moving. They were not breathing. But their eyes were open. Captain Wardwell later wrote in his suppressed report, "They looked like statues carved from wax. Their skin was translucent. Their lips were blue. But when I raised my lantern, I swear to God, one of them blinked." He ordered his men to drag them out into the daylight. That was his first mistake. The moment the nuns were exposed to sunlight, something changed. Private Holt described it as a sound like glass cracking, a low, wet noise that seemed to come from inside their bodies. And then, slowly, they began to move. Not like people waking from sleep, like machines being reactivated. Sister Magdalene was the first to speak. Her voice was thin, brittle, like paper tearing. She looked at Captain Wardwell and said, "You should not have opened the door. We were waiting." "Waiting for what?" the captain demanded. "For the cold to return." The soldiers did not understand. But Dr. Moreau's journals, discovered later in the hidden laboratory beneath the morgue, explained everything. The preservation formula worked by slowing the body's processes to near death. But it required one critical condition: constant cold. Without it, the formula began to break down. The body began to wake. And when it woke, it was no longer human. Captain Wardwell immediately sent for the Union Army's chief surgeon, Dr. Nathaniel Cross, a man who had performed amputations in the field and autopsied cholera victims. A man who believed only in what he could see and cut. When Dr. Cross examined Sister Magdalene, he found no pulse, no breath. Her skin was cold to the touch, her pupils fixed and dilated. But she was standing, speaking, moving. He took a scalpel and made a small incision on her forearm. No blood came out. Instead, a thick amber liquid seeped from the wound, the same liquid that had filled the glass vessels in the preservation chamber. Dr. Cross stepped back and said, "This is not a woman. This is a corpse that has been chemically puppeted." But Sister Magdalene smiled, and in a voice that no longer sounded entirely her own, she said, "We are more than corpses, Doctor. We are eternal. We made a vow, and God answered." Dr. Cross did not believe in God, but he believed in what he saw, and what he saw terrified him. He ordered the nuns to be restrained and quarantined immediately, but by then it was already too late, because the other 41 nuns were waking up too, and they were hungry. The hunger was not for food, it was for the formula. Dr. Moreau's journals revealed the terrible truth. The preservation process was not permanent. The formula degraded over time. Every 6 months, the subjects required a new infusion. Without it, the body began to fail. The organs calcified, the skin cracked, the mind fractured. And the nuns had not received an infusion since December of 1864. For over a month, they had been locked in the ice house, slowing their degradation through cold alone. But now, exposed to warmth, exposed to light, their bodies were shutting down. Fast. Sister Magdalene collapsed first. Her skin split along her arms like old parchment. The amber liquid oozed out, thick and rancid. She clawed at the ground and screamed, "The chamber! Take us to the chamber!" Captain Wardwell refused. He ordered his men to load the nuns onto wagons and transport them to the military hospital for study. But the nuns resisted, not with violence, with desperation. Sister Angelique, a woman who had been 23 years old when she entered the chamber in 1839, grabbed Private Holt by the collar and begged, "Please, we are servants of God. We are suffering. The doctor promised us eternity. You cannot let us rot." Private Holt, shaken, asked Captain Wardwell, "What if we give them what they need? What if we finish the treatment?" The captain's response was immediate. "We are not playing God. We are shutting this down." That night, while the nuns were locked in the military hospital's quarantine wing, a young lieutenant named Thomas Garvey broke into the convent's laboratory. He had heard the nuns' pleas. He had seen their suffering, and he believed foolishly that he could help. He found Dr. Moreau's final journal, the one marked Protocol for Emergency Infusion. The instructions were precise. Mix the formula in exact proportions, heat it to 98 degrees, inject it directly into the carotid artery. The subject will stabilize within minutes. But there was a note scrawled in the margin in handwriting that was not Dr. Moreau's. "Do not use the catalyst after 18 months of initial treatment. The subject will reject it. The consequences are irreversible." Lieutenant Garvey did not understand the warning. He prepared the formula anyway, and at midnight he entered the quarantine wing with a syringe in his hand. Lieutenant Garvey chose Sister Magdalene for the infusion. She was the oldest, the weakest, the one suffering the most. He injected the formula into her neck, just as the journal instructed. For 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then her eyes rolled back, her body convulsed, and when she opened her mouth to scream, black smoke poured out. The other nuns began to scream too, not in pain, in recognition, because they had seen this before. "Doctor, Moreau's final journal entries, the ones Lieutenant Garvey had not read far enough to find, described a failed experiment in 1863. A nun named Sister Beatrice had been given an emergency infusion after going 18 months without treatment. The formula had reacted with the degraded tissue in her body and created something new, something aware. The journal described it as a second consciousness, not human, not divine, something born from the chemical itself. It wants only one thing: to spread. Sister Magdalene stopped convulsing. She stood, and when she looked at Lieutenant Garvey, her eyes were no longer hers. They were black, reflective, like oil. She spoke, but her voice was layered, dozens of voices, all speaking at once. She said, "Thank you for waking us." What Lieutenant Garvey did not know, what none of them knew, was that Dr. Lucien Moreau had not died of old age in 1857, as the records claimed. He had entered the preservation chamber himself, and he had never left. The catalyst in his formula was not a chemical, it was biological. It was extracted from the pineal glands of the deceased. And over 30 years, as the nuns continued their vow of eternal service, Moreau had refined it, perfected it. Until it became something more than a preservative, it became a hive. Every nun who had been treated was connected, not through blood, through the formula itself. They shared thoughts, memories, sensations, and when one of them woke, they all woke. Sister Magdalene was no longer just Sister Magdalene, she was all 42 nuns. And she was Dr. Moreau. Captain Wardwell arrived at the quarantine wing minutes later, drawn by the screams. He found Lieutenant Garvey on the floor, his neck punctured, his blood drained. And standing over him were the nuns, all of them moving in perfect unison, all of them smiling. Captain Wardwell did not hesitate. He ordered the quarantine wing sealed and set ablaze. The building was wood and plaster. It burned fast. The flames roared through the hallways, consuming beds, medical supplies, and the bodies of 2 soldiers who had been standing guard. But the nuns did not burn. They walked out of the fire, their habits charred, but their skin untouched. The formula had made them resistant, not invincible, but resistant enough. Dr. Cross, watching from across the courtyard, understood immediately. He shouted to the captain, "Fire will not kill them. The formula hardens under heat. You need cold, extreme cold." But it was January in New Orleans. There was no snow, no ice, and the military hospital had no means of freezing 42 bodies at once. Captain Wardwell made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He ordered his men to drive the nuns into the Mississippi River. The soldiers formed a line, rifles raised, and marched the nuns toward the water. The nuns did not resist. They walked calmly, their hands folded, their eyes black and empty. Sister Magdalene, or the thing that had been Sister Magdalene, stopped at the riverbank and turned to face Captain Wardwell. She said, "You think drowning will stop us, but we do not need to breathe. We do not need hearts that beat. We are beyond death now." The captain replied, "Then you are beyond salvation." He gave the order. The soldiers fired. The bullets tore through the nuns' bodies, punching holes in their chests, their skulls, their spines, but no blood spilled. Only the amber liquid, thick and slow, oozing from the wounds. And still, they did not fall. They walked into the river. A Union engineer named Samuel Rost had been observing from the docks. He had seen the nuns walk into the water. He had seen them sink beneath the surface, one by one, until all 42 were submerged. He waited. 10 minutes, 20, 30, and then he saw the bubbles, not air bubbles, something thicker, rising from the riverbed in slow, deliberate streams, and with them came a smell, the same sweet chemical smell that had filled the convent basement. Rust turned to Captain Wardwell and said, "They are not drowning. They are dissolving, and whatever is inside them is leaching into the water. Within 48 hours, reports began flooding into the Union command post. Fishermen downstream were pulling up nets filled with dead catfish, their bodies bloated and their eyes turned black. A family living near the docks fell violently ill, vomiting amber liquid that smelled like formaldehyde and rot. And worst of all, 3 bodies washed ashore near Algiers Point. Not the nuns, new bodies, men who had drowned weeks earlier, but now they were moving. Dr. Cross examined one of the bodies personally. He found traces of the formula in the corpse's tissues. Somehow, the residue from the nuns had spread through the water, reanimating anything dead it touched. He wrote in his emergency report, "The catalyst is not dormant. It is reproductive. If we do not contain it, the entire Mississippi River will become a graveyard that refuses to stay buried." The military response was immediate and brutal. Captain Wardwell was relieved of his command. The case was transferred to a unit that did not officially exist, the Department of Unusual Incidents, a shadow branch of the War Department tasked with suppressing threats that defied natural law. Their solution was simple: silence. Within 1 week, St. Ursula's convent was demolished. Every brick, every pipe, every scrap of evidence was burned and buried in a mass grave on the outskirts of the city. The grave was filled with lime and sealed with concrete. The hospital where the nuns had been quarantined was condemned and torn down. The Mississippi River downstream from New Orleans was declared a quarantine zone. Fishing was banned for 6 months, and every witness, every soldier, every doctor, every engineer who had seen what happened was transferred to remote postings or discharged under mysterious circumstances. Captain Wardwell was sent to a frontier outpost in Wyoming, where he died 2 years later under unclear circumstances. Dr. Cross was committed to an asylum in Massachusetts, where he spent his final years insisting that the dead could be made to walk. Lieutenant Garvey, the man who had injected Sister Magdalene, was never seen again. His service record listed him as a deserter. The official story released to the public was simple. St. Ursula's convent was closed due to structural damage from the war. The nuns relocated to a mission in Mexico. No further questions were entertained, but the people of New Orleans knew better. They stopped fishing near the Garden District docks. They avoided the riverbank after dark, and they told their children never to speak the name, Sister Magdalene. For over a century, Dossier 73-U remained classified, buried in the National Archives under a designation that made it invisible to researchers, marked simply as theological threat, quarantine protocol enacted, do not unseal. It was not until 1979, during a routine declassification review, that a junior archivist named Margaret Chen stumbled upon it. She was sorting through Civil War medical records when she found a folder that did not match the others. It was thicker, heavier, and it was sealed with wax that bore no official government seal. Inside, she found Captain Wardwell's suppressed report, Dr. Cross's autopsy notes, Lieutenant Garvey's confession, written the night before he vanished, and at the very bottom, a single photograph. It was dated March 1865, 2 months after the incident. The photograph showed a section of the Mississippi River near Baton Rouge, and standing on the shore, partially submerged in the water, was a figure in a nun's habit. The figure was facing the camera. Her eyes were black. Margaret Chen showed the photograph to her supervisor, who immediately confiscated it. The file was resealed. The photograph was never seen again. But Margaret remembered one detail that haunted her until her death in 2003. In the background of the photograph, barely visible, were other figures, dozens of them, standing in the water, waiting. In 1997, an urban exploration team broke into the ruins of the old military hospital site in New Orleans. They were filming a documentary about abandoned Civil War buildings. They found nothing unusual: empty rooms, graffiti, broken glass. But when they reviewed their footage later, they noticed something strange. In one of the basement rooms, visible for only 3 frames of video, was a shape. a pale figure in dark clothing, standing perfectly still. The team uploaded the footage to the internet, where it was dismissed as a hoax. But forensic analysts who examined the video confirmed it had not been edited. Whatever was in that basement had been there when they filmed it. The building was demolished 6 months later. The official reason given was safety concerns, but construction workers reported finding something unusual in the foundation, a sealed chamber filled with glass vessels and copper pipes. And inside the vessels was a residue, amber, thick, still faintly warm. The chamber was immediately filled with concrete and buried. Today, the site where St. Ursula's convent once stood is a parking lot. A small historical marker nearby mentions that a Catholic mission operated there in the 1800s, but provides no details. Tourists walk past it every day without a second glance. The Mississippi River still flows through New Orleans, carrying its secrets downstream. Fishermen still avoid certain stretches near the old Garden District docks, though few remember why. It has simply become tradition, a superstition passed down through generations. But there are stories. Late at night, when the fog rolls in thick from the river, some claim to see figures standing in the water, pale, unmoving, dressed in clothing from another century. They never come ashore, they never speak, they simply watch. And in the archives of the Archdiocese of New Orleans, there exists a ledger from 1865 that records the closure of St. Ursula's convent. The entry is brief, almost dismissive. It states that the 42 nuns who served there were transferred to missions abroad, and their fates are unknown. But in the margin, written in faded ink by a hand that has never been identified, is a single line in Latin: Vovimus aeternum servire, et vovimus ad hoc. We vowed to serve forever, and we are serving still. Dossier 73-U was resealed in 1980 and transferred to a vault beneath the National Archives building in Washington. The vault is temperature-controlled, kept at exactly 32 degrees Fahrenheit, the same temperature as the ice house where the nuns were found. No explanation for this protocol has ever been provided. And in 2005, during Hurricane Katrina, when the levees broke and the floodwaters consumed New Orleans, rescue workers reported something strange. In the submerged neighborhoods near the Garden District, they found bodies floating in the water. Old bodies, preserved bodies, bodies that should have decomposed decades ago. The bodies were collected and cremated immediately. No records were kept, no investigations launched. But the rescue workers who pulled them from the water all reported the same thing. The bodies were wearing habits, and their eyes, even in death, were open, watching, waiting.